and then we didn't keep up with the changes. So eventually it became this like months long, almost years long giant project, but it was a nightmare. Like to me, that was like the evil technical debt that is just like brutal.
You're using the same terms though. Something
Yeah.
changed, right? And we had to adapt, and we weren't able to because we hadn't kept up with the rate of change. And there was a moment that forced us to.
I like that definition of the inability to keep up with change.
It's the simplest one I've ever come up with for it, because I've always tried to come up with one that we can all agree on, because we all talk about it. It's like I said, with the definition of done. You're going to get 4 different answers. In the case of tech debt, you're going to get 12 different answers, right?
And we're back for another episode of the Startup Hustle. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by Christian Hammer. He's the founder and CEO of Vala AI. He's been doing some really cool stuff and trying to create AI for software development, help companies with technical debt, understand all sorts of different software development stuff with his company. We're going to have a fun conversation today. For those who don't know, I've basically also been a CTO for the last 20 years, and so should be a really fun conversation. A couple nerds talking about building software and all the complexities of it. Before we get started, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by my company, Full Scale. If you need to hire software developers, no matter what your tech stack is, front end, back end, mobile, QA, whatever you need help with, check us out at fullscale.ai, fullscale.io. Welcome to the show, Christian.
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, and I think first off, I want to mention that you also host a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast real fast too?
Yeah, sure. Techtastic is an optimistic view of technology and its impacts on society, like trying to keep us thinking about how we can make the world a better place through technology. And I often do very similar things where I'll bring in other founders, sometimes scientists, people with leading thought leaders in the space, whether it's AI or flying cars. It doesn't really matter as long as they're pushing the envelope and trying to make the world better.
So tell me a little more about, you started Vala, and you mentioned before you had a couple different pivots along the way. Yeah. What was the original idea, when you first started this?
Yeah, so the original idea was, I was looking at my wife, who's got effectively alphabet soup after her name, many advanced degrees, professional certifications, brilliant person, right? But she doesn't speak tech. And what she ends up getting pulled into large companies to do is to take all that experience and knowledge and bring it to bear. She's a knowledge worker, right? To bring that to bear on the business and help them solve a problem. But she's hindered by the technology that's supposed to empower her. And that version of tech debt, to me, was really profoundly impactful on society as a whole, because you have somebody who's passionate, knowledgeable, and experienced that's just getting burned out and held back by tech. That's not the point of tech. Like, I got into tech to empower people, to give them more ability to move faster, be more productive, to be better versions. And I said, well, for the first time, I think we have the ability to build technology that enables that person to solve their own tech debt problems, to build the tools they need to do their job well, rather than having it go through many layers of translation to eventually be written into code. And so I built a tool I called Brother, which, if you've heard of Devon AI is the same idea conceptually.
Yeah.
Right. Software engineered, it's an AI tool, but it was really clever in some ways. Like, it asked a lot of questions. It acted like a product manager to get requirements out of you, wrote all your automated QA, followed TDD best practices. So, it tried to do some clever stuff, and then it would spit out code. But that ran into some big problems, right?
So you mentioned that you were trying to help solve a tech debt problem, but I'm curious why you referred to it as tech debt, because to me it sounds more like you've got a product owner, they want to build a product. How do you bridge the gap between the product owner and building whatever the product is, which isn't necessarily tech debt directly, it's more just delivery.
Yeah, so this gets into the conversation of what is tech debt, which I love to talk about, because it has a lot of different views. I described it earlier as 5 blind men describing an elephant. Each of them's got their hands on a different part and has a different belief of what it is. If you were to ask the CEO of any large corporation what tech debt is, they would say it's wherever technology slows me down instead of helping me. It's wherever I've got within my operations, within my business, something that's not making it more productive. And from that view, what my wife was dealing with and what anybody in that space, any knowledge worker that's hindered by the technology is held back by, is the choices we made in the past. Whether it was a product manager didn't build exactly what was needed, but in her case and most people's case, it's not custom software, it's custom technology that the business she works in built. They bought it, they implement it, and then they integrate it with their other technology so that it gets the appropriate data or whatever into it so the workflow works. And the problem with off-the-shelf software is it's generalized. It has to be. It's not built for your specific use case within your business. And so inherently, any off-the-shelf software has a form of tech debt. It's not perfectly matched to your needs.
I mean, I like that definition of tech debt as anything that slows your business down. I think this is a little different use case than, a truly custom software dev, like a SaaS company. You're like, oh, we built this thing, we have tech debt. This example is a little different because it's more like, oh, we have all these off the shelf things. We have all this stuff. And yeah, we have problems with all of it and those slow us down. But I'm curious, what your definition is of tech debt in more of a traditional SaaS company. I mean, what would you
in some ways
consider
it's the same,
SaaS in a SaaS
right?
company?
In some ways, it's often the same. It's where the needs of the business are not met by the technology. If I've developed SaaS. I've been a turbo nerd for a long time, written lots of software myself too, and I tended to think of it as anywhere. Most people in technology would probably describe software as any place that I have to spend more time maintaining than it provides in value, or a place that I have to revisit because it no longer meets the needs of the business. They've asked me, there's new requirements, it needs to change. Another definition I've heard is, and this is the one that I defined as the keystone problem, there's only a couple people that know how this silly thing works. And at some point, they're going to leave the business, but it needs to change. And I have to ask that one or two people to solve it for me. Like this would be like the COBOL Fortran legacy system tech debt version. There's only a few people that know it. They're going to go away. It's debt that we have to repay. But it has so many definitions, and it's very much like my favorite example of where definitions fail us is in a tech org. Ask 4 different people with different roles what done means. When is this story done? Right? It has the same thing. And this is actually one of the things that I think us as technology leaders have failed at, is that we've promised that the future is bright and it's all automated and there's technology is going to solve all these problems for you if we just make this one more investment, if we just modernize this time. But the reality is modernization is a treadmill. It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Once you're done, you got to start again because it's evolving so fast, right?
So if you don't subscribe to my newsletter, you should go to startuphustlenews.com and subscribe to it. One of the articles I wrote, this is probably about a year ago, and it was the most popular article I've ever wrote. It went viral on Reddit and Hacker News, was about how my entire career was technical debt. And so will everybody else's. Like, I went through like everything I'd ever built my entire career over a 25-year period was either deprecated, technical debt, needed to be rewritten, whatever. It was all dead code at this point, or should be dead code. And that is just the reality of most software development, is eventually it's going to be gone. And for a whole host of reasons, right? It's like, oh, I wrote something in Visual Basic 6 or COBOL or like some old language. Like, well, we don't use that anymore, so it needs to be written. Or you're like, hey, I'm using Adobe Flash or Silverlight, and it's all this cool stuff in the browser. Well, guess what? Apple made that gone. Like, we don't do that anymore, right? Like, or I built mobile apps on Windows CE before the iPhone existed, right? I built mobile apps back then, more than like 20 years ago, right? Like all these things that we build eventually, sometimes the technology itself just goes out of favor, but a lot of times the business replaces it, right? Like, oh, well, you built this thing, but then we decided to build something new and replace that thing, or the business got acquired, or whatever. There's like 1,000 different reasons, but virtually all the software that we ever build over a period of time, be it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, that percentage goes up dramatically over a period of time, that it goes away or gets replaced. Like you said, we're on the treadmill. Like, you have to keep building new stuff.
And that rate of change is accelerating. AI has enabled there to be like even more powerful no-code, low-code tools. It's allowing developers that are actually even skilled developers using things like Copilot that can produce more faster. So the rate of change is increasing exponentially. And that is meaning that tech debt is accumulating exponentially faster as well. And second to that, like your point about everything we create is tech debt, 100% agree. I've always thought that. But we live in a world in which it's often seen as a capital expenditure. I built it, therefore it exists, it has value. And that's what's been sold to the business most frequently. Like, we're just going to build this thing. Once we have it, we have it. The sunk cost fallacy in software, custom software in particular, is incredibly entrenched. And one of the things we have to do is dislodge that, because the rate of change of the business, the rate of the change of the needs of the business, the rate of change of technology itself, it's all accelerating. And our job is to enable it to accelerate even faster so that it keeps pace with the business, because TechNet is the gap between that. This is what the business needs. This is what the technology provides. That's your debt. And if the business needs are changing faster than our technology can evolve, the accumulation of debt is therefore increasing at a greater rate.
What I wish we would do as an industry is just stop using the word technical debt and figure out some other terminology. Because as you just described, like as a business owner, I consider them all technical assets. None of them are debt. They're all assets. I paid a lot of money to build this stuff. If it still works, we're going to keep using it. And right. I don't have to pay any debt. I don't owe anybody any money. I'm using this thing and it works. You know, like I had to go to the state of Kansas today, their website, to do some online filing for my business. And guess what? It was written in some old .NET code, like I can tell from the URL. But you know what? It works. There's nothing wrong with that thing. It's an asset. Now, as a software developer, would we call it technical debt? Probably. Yeah, of course. It's like, oh, this old code's 15 years old, blah, blah, blah. It's technical debt. But I actually just kind of hate the terminology. I wish we had like 5 other definitions. As you said, like everybody has 5 definitions. I just wish we used those other 5 definitions and didn't use that term.
Yeah, it was meant as a way of describing something that we have to pay down, because the technologists were always like, it sucks for us. We have to maintain this thing. I have to go hire some engineer that can still write in VB6 or whatever, right? Like I need to maintain this thing. I feel the pain of it. I'm the technologist. So for us, it's always been a form of debt. It impedes my ability to do new things, which is all I want to do. So we've thought of it in that standpoint. That's how we sell it to the business. Yeah. And to your point, the rate of change piece is the most important part. If I'm in a stable industry that is not changing, or I'm a government organization in which laws change at a snail's pace by comparison to like business needs changing, then those things are assets as long as they don't need to change. Like it's the fact that at some point it will, and now I have to rebuild the whole thing because there's nobody in the organization that can still write in that, or the technology is completely unsupported. I therefore can't develop anything new in it anyway. Like that's the instant it becomes debt, because change occurred. My needs changed.
Well, I've definitely seen that. One of my last companies, they got acquired, and the parent company, the core of their product was all written in Perl. And guess how hard was it? How hard it was to find a Perl developer?
Oh man,
it was almost impossible, right? Yeah. Like so that is definitely a problem. But when I think of technical debt, I definitely believe that it's the things that are slowing my business down, or preventing me from doing, other things that I need to do. And so for a great example of this, at my last company, a lot of it was maintenance work. It's not like there's nothing wrong with our code. Our code was perfect. Our team was perfect. We didn't have any of those problems. The problem I had is we went from, .NET version 4 to version 7. Well, now how do I upgrade from version 4 to 7 and all the work that goes along with that? Or we're stuck at 4, and eventually, that creates more and more problems over time, right? And actually, the biggest problem we had was we were using Elasticsearch, and we were on some old API for Elasticsearch, and then Elasticsearch changed, and then we didn't keep up with the changes. So eventually, it became this like months long, almost years long, giant project, just basically to change the API we were using against Elasticsearch. But it was a nightmare. Like, to me, that was like the evil technical debt that is just like brutal, that kind of stuff.
You're using the same terms though. Something changed, right? and we had to adapt. And we weren't able to because we hadn't kept up with the rate of change. And there was a moment that forced us to.
I like that definition of the inability to keep up with change.
Yep. It's the simplest one I've ever come up with for it, because I've always tried to come up with one that we can all agree on, because we all talk about it. It's like I said, with the definition of done. Like, you're going to get 4 different answers. In case of tech debt, you're going to get 12 different answers, right? Well, then we're not speaking the same language.
You originally said we were going to have 5. I wrote down 3 so far, so we're getting closer.
Yeah.
I got 3 good ones here. We're not done yet.
Yeah, no, you can keep going on this one for a long time. The resistance to, it's resistance to change is another one, right? So, and you mentioned a form of that. If I make this change, I have to update a bunch of systems that are dependent on it. Or I have to update the version of something and I have to make all the permutations to change that. Another version of that also comes up is like security vulnerabilities that have been identified. And now I need to go fix those. Now, to do that, I need to now go upgrade a bunch of components within it, which causes me to cascade through and have to do all those.
Yep.
Right? That's a form of tech debt, but it comes down to the same thing. Things have changed.
We're not. Yeah, a lot of times. Right? I mean, another example of this, like just more simply, is a lot of maintenance work. Like you said, it's just described. A lot of it's just maintenance work, like needs to be done for security or all the stuff.
Was to take care of all the janitorial services of software dev. Like, well, if we're not going to empower, we're not going to federate the ability to code, we're not going to take the curtain back from us wizards that have been sitting back there pulling the knobs and dials and just give access to everybody to that. If we can't do that, can we take the burden off of the technology teams to do all this grunt work that doesn't provide any new value? And the first thing that we tried to solve for, and largely we're capable of doing it, was the dependency graph changed. Something, right. I had to upgrade. Well, you can do that within a limited scope pretty effectively, but once you get into like the complexities of modern enterprise, where like there's some stuff in Perl and there's some stuff in Java and there's stuff that's in different versions of VB and across the map, because they've had different flavors being developed at different times. What happens when they touch each other? Because there's an API gateway between them and the data had to change to fix the component change. That, like, once you start getting to that level of complexity, automating it becomes nearly impossible. Right. And that's what we ran into.
You get killed by the edge cases, right? Like the simple parts of it are simple, but like even a project that I was kind of involved with last year, they upgraded versions of PHP, and for whatever reason, it changed the JSON serialization. I can't remember which way, but like it was serializing the number 1 as a 1, and all of a sudden it was serializing it as a 1, but in quotes, like it was a string, but it was a 1. Well, whatever was reading that was in JavaScript, so types don't matter. We don't care about types in JavaScript. And of course, that just blows JavaScript up like crazy, because it thought it was a number, and now it thinks it's a string that's a 1. Like, it just blew up the whole thing all over the place. It's like the littlest things like this that can be edge cases that you don't know. Like it didn't, our system worked fine. We didn't have any problems, but the people calling our system, all of a sudden their entire system was totally crashed.
Right. And it's the things that when you're in IT, right, it's how many nines. I need at least 5 nines of reliability coming out of my systems. And if I can only give you 50%,
do you want those 9s in quotes?
Right.
That was the problem on this day. So it's like it's the craziness that happens. So that sounds like a great idea, something that could help identify these dependencies, figure out which ones would be easy to upgrade. WordPress, like we use WP Engine, and it kind of does something like this for plugins. Like it'll install new plugins on your WordPress site, and it does some kind of testing. I don't know if it just takes like before and after screenshots and make sure visually everything looks the same. I don't know what it does, but it works pretty good.
Yeah.
And it'll roll back the plugin if something doesn't work. But for what you guys were trying to do, it's not that you don't really have the ability to test the software, right? Like it's like, oh, we can tell you here's the pull request and whatever to change the dependencies, but we don't really know if they're going to work.
That's right. And so that's when we took another hard look at what we're doing. And this is the game, right? Like if you're in the startup world, you're going to like run into roadblocks, and you can either go through them or you can go over them, but you've got to find your way around it. And in this case, it was like, well, the problem that we were trying to address this was just a symptom of it. And we might be better off to just tell them about their entire tech stack. So you've been the CTO of large companies, and one of the things that I always found the most difficult was you've got so much social capital when you're first hired that you can spend within the organization, and you've got a limited window to really identify opportunities and then have some mark left on the org. I made some change that had an impact. I'd say you got 3 months of free capital where you're allowed to be the idiot in the room, understanding the business, I'm figuring it out. So you can say, I don't know. After 3 months, you better know. And within 6 months, you got to make your mark. And when you come in as a technology leader in an org, the problem is you're surrounded by most of the people you interact with are CEO, CFO, CRO. Like, these are business people. They don't speak tech. Your job is to translate the tech to them. And the problem that causes is that you almost forget how to speak tech because you're so speaking business all the time and you're not deep in the weeds anymore. You can't be. So what do? You find trusted resources. You find that enterprise architect that seems to know what the hell's going on, and you put your trust in a couple people. If you're like me, though, you bring those with you. The people I know that'll go deep, and I give them, like, here's the guardrails, here's what you need to tell me. I need to know this because we need to make this kind of change within this time frame so that I can continue to have the political capital necessary to invest in this space and for us to do the things we know we need to do. Give me the ammunition. And that's what our tools our tool tries to help with that too, by telling you, here's what you've got. Here's where you've got zombie code. Here's where you've got orphan systems. Here's where you got things that are radically out of date. Here's where you've got things that just don't seem to meet the business needs.
Well, and I think one of the hardest problems in building software is not writing the code. It's knowing what code to write. It's getting the business side of it to speak to the tech side of it. And as software engineers, I feel like most of them are engineers. They don't really think about product. They don't ask why enough. They don't understand the users enough. They don't have enough empathy for the users enough, right? I think they struggle with a lot of those things. They're very smart people, they're very brilliant people, they're very logical, but understanding why they're doing what they're doing is something they always struggle with. And I feel like we have the same problems on the business side. So I feel like on the business side, we're always run into, a handful of issues that really prevent them from being effective as well. And the first one is always this is the way we've always done it. Oh. So can you make the software do this thing? Right. And then you're smiling because you and I both know, like, if we're in that meeting, we're sitting here going, y'all are a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that. Like, the reason we're building the software is that way was terrible. And we're trying to do this a better way. And you're sitting here telling us, well, we have to do it this way. And why do we do it though? I don't know. It's this way we've always done it. Well, that doesn't mean we're going to keep doing that. Yeah. But in every big company, that is like the number one way they think, right? Like they're trying to maintain status quo.
And at the beginning, when I said that the biz doesn't speak tech and tech doesn't speak biz, this is a lot of what I'm talking about. Is that in technology, we want to know the why. We always want to know the why, because we need that appropriate context to build the right thing. So you don't ask me in a month to come fix it because I missed a requirement. That's what you'll tell me, right? I want to know really who's using it. And when we get that answer, because that's what it does, we all cringe, rightfully so. I don't want to give you what you've got. Why the hell would I do that? Why would I rebuild what I've got?
Yeah.
Right? If the answer is, well, I can't maintain it, that should be coming from me. I'm the technologist that's telling you, hey, man, at some point you're going to want this thing to be replaced because it's not meeting your needs. I don't have anybody that can do it right now. Better we start now than wait till it has to be done. So anyways, the point of the technology that we've been building out is to just bridge that divide. I can tell you as a non-technical user what the technology is doing for you and why. Here's what it does. And we try to be very conscious of the facts. Here are the facts about what you have, as opposed to the opinions or the subjective view of it. It appears that it does this, but here are the facts around that. You do $2 billion of business that go through that system. We think it does this.
Yeah, and the other issue I see a lot is I feel like most business people, there's two problems. They don't know what's possible with technology, right? So when they come, they say, this is the problem we need to solve. Someone who's really smart, who's built a lot of software, can look at it and be like, okay, that makes sense, but you could actually probably solve this like 10 different ways. Which of these 10 different ways actually makes the most sense? And they don't know. Like, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know, like, oh, we could crawl in the database and we could do this and we could build a report. We could, whatever the thing is, or we could integrate with this third-party thing and use an LLM and it'll only cost $20, but it's gonna be cool. Watch this. Like, they don't know, right? Which is fine. That's the gap that we can help bridge, and that's why it's really valuable to have people like us that have built a lot of stuff, seen a lot of stuff. We understand. But I think one of the biggest struggles is, especially for more junior developers, is most business people cannot vocalize the problems they have. I feel like they can only vocalize the symptoms to the problems that they have. They can't tell you like what the problem really is, and they can't tell you what they really need. They can just tell you like, my head hurts and my stomach hurts, and that's it. And like, as technologists, we have to ask all the questions. Like you said earlier, like it starts with why. Like you got to ask a lot of questions, and then like we're playing the doctor here. Like we're trying to figure out like what is it you really need. And back to the point of like, you could solve this 10 different ways, and we might at the end of them tell them like, hey, you just need some Pepto-Bismol, go away.
One of the worst permutation of that problem that I've dealt with so many times and drives me nuts is when they come in with a semi-informed view of what needs to be done. Right? They know the symptoms and they're like, just give me aspirin. Like, hold on.
You're missing a leg. Hold on.
Yeah. Well, you've got an upset stomach. It's going to upset it worse. Like, is that what you really want? So and it just comes back to that. We don't speak the same language. And I actually have a way of talking about software development that touches on this a lot. If you think of what a product manager's job has always been to be, it's to translate the business to tech. But they're just one link in a game of telephone being played.
Yeah.
We, as technologists, the guys writing the code aren't even the last link. If we're writing in a compiled language, the compiler's the last link before it's bits. It's a long game of telephone being played, and we're not always perfect even in our own zone. So expecting anybody to be perfect is the problem. And we fix it by there's two ways I think we can fix it. Either we get all the other nodes of that game of telephone removed, take all the people out, take all the chances of translation failure out, and just get the people that need it, the tools to build their own tools. That's one way. And the other is to just have a better way of translating along the way. To give people tools that'll label them to really talk to each other as they understand it, to give them the appropriate context. How's this thing going to be used? What are they going to use it for? Where's the provenance of my data? You know how many times this one comes up? I'm sure you do. A big tech debt item that happens a lot is we thought that this data element meant this. It comes out of this other system. We thought it meant this. We implemented it. We found out later that it didn't actually mean what we thought it meant. We thought it told us the inventory in the warehouse, but what it actually told us was how many of that thing were in a bin. It's not the same thing. I might have 5 bins with that thing in it. That problem comes up because we all lack the appropriate level of context when we're doing our jobs. That non-technologists can't tell you the technology requirements because they're not technologists. They don't have that context. You as a technologist don't know their specific job, and you can spend all day for weeks sitting down with them and asking them questions, but you're never going to have a perfect view.
Well, and this is part of the problem you're trying to solve in the latest iteration pivot of your company, right? Like this is part of the problem you're trying to solve by collecting all this information, and then ultimately, how will somebody interact with all this information?
Same way you interact with any other AI today. I ask questions in a chat message, right? We do give dashboards. Like there's what I've called the old-timey map. It's not really a map. It's just the way I describe it. It's a dashboard that tells you where you've got zombies, orphans, etc. Like I call it the old-timey map because on old-timey maps, when there was an undiscovered country, they would write dragons here. They put some monster to say like, we don't know what's there. It's scary. In our tech world, that's also true, right? If we don't know what's there, I don't know what system's there. I don't know what logic's there. I don't know what it does. That should be terrifying. And so we try to like give you that holistic view of where you've got zombies, monsters, and orphans.
That sounds really useful. I'm excited to see how you progress with this. Like what stage are you at this point with doing this?
So our first foundational model is in development today because we do have the way that our platform works is kind of clever, I hope. And we've got some very smart people working on it. But the belief that any one LLM can hold both views of context and give you meaningful outcomes is kind of nuts. And so we have one large language model that's trained on that corpus of knowledge from the outside world, world's best practices on this technology, all the API data from different technologies that you might interface with, like all that worldview. And then we train a custom one on the business that it's being used in. And then the viewpoint of what's good and bad is an argument between those two effectively. And so that external model, it exists, and we're at a pretty early stage of it. It does some cool stuff. The internal models we can build on the fly, but the platform that enables those two things to interact and giving you meaningful insights exists. We built that up originally. That's actually the alpha product that went out and we pulled back. Same platform. It works the same way. So that exists. We're currently raising our pre-seed round because it's not like you can build this thing with two people. It's been more than us for a while, but we're raising our pre-seed today so that we can continue to build it out and get it into our first customers' hands, of which we already have several very large customers that are wanting the platform that we've been speaking with at length and helping them as effectively consultants until we have the platform in place.
Well, it sounds really cool. Excited to see what you come up with it is as you progress. I'm curious for you to tell us a little more about, you were trying to build AI to do all this, like at the first iteration of this. Like how do you feel at least where AI is today, as being able to replace a software developer with Devin or any of these things?
Yeah, if you're building something simple, a tool like Devin can work, but it's very much like a junior engineer. And this is the problem that a lot of this is, it's immature. And I would say that any place that you use enterprise AI in the enterprise, you better treat it like an intern or a very, very junior person. Like I've said, it's like a teenage boy. It's very opinionated. It believes it's right, but it's probably not. That you need to treat it that way because we're at the very beginning of it. It is opinionated without having necessarily facts to back it up. And the world that we live in requires us to back it up with facts and to build off of truths, right? So that's where we're at with it right now. Is there are some very compelling use cases for it. There's really some cool stuff with it you can do with it. You can definitely ask it for its opinion, but you better have a human in the loop to check and make sure that's true and worth doing.
Well, somebody posted something similar to this on LinkedIn the other day. They're like, "Oh, I built this cool thing where I built some test cases, and then I told it to write the code for me that, the test cases would work." And I'm like, "That's great. We're just going to tell it to try a whole bunch of crap until one of them randomly works and meets all of your test cases. Like, this is how we're going to build software now? Like, just randomly try all the different things until all the test cases clear. Like, this is scary to me. I don't like this idea."
Yeah, no, and this is, I told you that we abandoned the brother route, which was Devin, right? Same kind of idea. Because I thought of my own job in the past as like a CTO at a big company, and I went, would I ever allow this in? Would I ever allow anybody to deploy this in the code that it generated? And if I did, what kind of guardrails would I have to put up around this thing? Because the truth of writing software is anybody can code. Like there are chatbots today that you can sit down and pump out all the code you want. That's not our jobs. We're knowledge workers. We're experts on systems and integrations and taking human needs, transforming that into logic that a computer can execute. That's not coding. Coding is just the output of our job. It's the last step.
Well, and I definitely agree with you, although I think there are a lot of software developers that are not very good at that. They're engineers. Like we have software engineers now. We don't have software developers. And I feel like that's the big difference, right? If I wanted to over-engineer something or I wanted to order something, I would give them all the specs, somebody would engineer it, and I would get it back, right? Where I feel like we need more software developers that ask why and they figure all this out and figure out how to deliver the solution. To me, I think that's the big difference between developers and engineers, but not everyone agrees with me.
It's an interesting point, and I've argued this one, like engineer versus coder, because an engineer implicitly minimizes risk. They're looking for the optimal solution with minimum risk. That's what almost like the universal definition of engineer is. How many software engineers actually do that? What we have is we do have some software engineers. We have a lot of coders. And a coder doesn't in any way try to come up with an optimal solution, minimizing risk. They're just trying to translate the things they're asked to do into code that a computer can execute. And I prefer software engineers, but not exclusively. I need coders too, but I don't want, it's like I don't want preponderance of either. I need people that will just go do, but I also need people to think through the implications of it.
I feel like the engineer, from that kind of definition, to me, engineer also is like saying they're architects. It's like I need somebody to architect this thing the right way and make it scale, make it perform. Okay, you could call them an engineer. Maybe that's the difference. But to me, it's like we just called everybody architects now. Everybody's a software engineer. Like, okay, everybody's a software architect, which is not really the case.
Well, and to that point, like maybe using that term is a better one, because in any project, you never want more than one architect. Like when I build a house, I want one architect.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes sense, but it's the, college degrees sell better when they're called software engineer.
Oh, yeah.
And when you're paying $50,000 a year, I mean, that's important.
Is that all?
It's a crazy world we live in. Yeah, crazy world we live in. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. Why don't you tell us again a little bit about your company, how people can learn more, and your podcast and stuff?
Sure. The easiest way to find out more about Vala is vala-ai.com. I wish I could just say it was vala.ai.com or vala.com, but we don't have those domains. And yeah, we're trying to solve that knowledge worker gap problem that creates tech debt, and specifically in the technology space. That was the worst description. Please don't use that. Actually, one of the descriptions I've used that I really like because it's true is we are the world's first AI enterprise architect. And I use that description because it's actually the jobs that we're solving are the ones that I've always used enterprise architects to do. Go explain to the business what's possible and explain to the technology team what they're asking for. And that's what we do. And then Techtastic, you can go to techtastic.tech. It's T-E-Tech, as in TECHTASTIC.tech. And you can get it anywhere you get podcasts, including YouTube.
All right. And we'll have links in the show notes for those as well. Well, Christian, thank you so much for being on the show today. Reminder, guys, if you need help with doing software development, check us out at fullscale.io. Thanks, Christian.
Absolutely, man, Matt. Absolute pleasure. Love to be on the show. And it's a pleasure to get the chance to chat.
All right. Thank you.